are stories that connect us to ourselves and each other. These stories reveal who we are and show us the many vivid, wild colors of our truth. Welcome to Soul Wanderings, where we raise spiritual awareness and foster connections through these shared stories and personal experiences. And now, exclusively on KGRA Radio, I give you your host for Soul Wanderings Radio. Here's AJ.
Hello, welcome. You are listening to Soul Wanderings here on KGRARadio.com. We're here every Wednesday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, wandering with a new guest each week about their authentic journey through this human experience. And I am AJ Rasmussen. I'm an owner and a manager of a heart healing space called Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. And it's there where I get to assist others in matters of the mind, body, spirit, and the heart. And I also am your host of Soul Wanderings. Hello, Wanderers. Welcome, welcome. I'm happy to have you here wandering with us tonight, and I hope you're all bundled in and staying nice and warm this evening and are ready for yet another wandering. Tonight, I am over in the chat room and would like for you to be there with me and other wanderers. You can do that by going to kgraradio.com/chat. The chat room is a space where you can visit with other wanderers throughout the show. And of course, you can ask our guests some questions. And if you do find yourself wanting to ask questions, make sure you type them in caps so myself or Bill can catch them easily throughout the show, and we will ask them as time allows us to do so. Okay, Wanderers, let's get this show going. Our guest tonight is Monk Yun Rou, a Deist monk. He's a Tai Chi master, an author of 15 books and many other publications. He's often been referred to as the new Alan Watts. He's also the host of a national public television show called Longevity Tai Chi. And tonight we will be hearing about his journey story, of course, and his latest book, Mad Monk Manifesto, a prescription for evolution, revolution, and global awakening. Hello and welcome to Soul Wanderings.
So happy to be with you.
Thank you. I am very happy that you reached out and wanted to wander with us. What a privilege it is to have you here.
Thank you.
So, I know very little about you. This will be an interesting wandering, not just for myself, but for our listeners. I'm excited to have you.
The first thing to know is that I'm bald.
I gathered that from your photos. I actually like bald. I think it's very charming. I like it a lot. So how's that going for you?
Well, it's one of those things. It comes up and you accept it. The alternative is not practicable.
Well, you're rocking the bald, so that's good.
Good to hear.
Yeah, so there you have quite a journey story. I've done some research on you, which I don't normally do with guests. I like it to be very authentic, but because I didn't know a whole lot about you, I did dig in a little bit. And you've had quite the life. So you started off one way and you have evolved into another way of life. So like with many of my guests, I like to know where their journey began. Like go back as far as you're comfortable with and share with us a little bit about yourself.
So as far as beginning one way and ending up another, I think I'm probably the same little boy I was. I just have less hair. I think that we are all born with a certain proclivity, a certain propensity, and that isn't to say that we can't change our behaviors or modify things we do or things we want. But I think that we probably, this is the old nature versus nurture question. And I don't know that it's a versus. I think it's both, but I don't think you can erase the nature. So I think I was born a seeker. I was born one of those irritating children. I'm sure I was not a great joy to my parents, who questioned everything and wanted to see always what was underneath things. I wanted to understand the deeper meanings and workings of life. And at a very early age, I began a love affair, which I still engage, with turtles. And I remember being 9 years old on a little river in Connecticut in a canoe and looking at this beautiful river and the plants overhanging it and what little I could see of the world underneath the water. And I saw this little turtle pop up. And he looked around 360, he saw the sky, he saw me, he saw my canoe, he saw the river banks, and then he went back under to the world of duckweed and fishes and all that. And I remember thinking, wow, wouldn't that be just the thing? To be able to see beneath the surface of the pond of life at will. Mm-hmm. So I think, I always had that seeker's gene.
I also love turtles. They happen to be my spirit animal. And I noticed in some of your social media that you have a lot of pictures of turtles.
I really love turtles. And I don't know whether it's their stoicism, their self-reliance, the fact that they are still around after hundreds of millions of years. Maybe it's the fact that they need our help so badly right now, despite all that, and that we are, committing such a holocaust against the planet, and they are the most helpless little victims. So there must be some. I don't really think of myself as a rescuer, but I don't tend to be that in relationships. But I have to say that I really have that instinct when it comes to turtles. And I'm especially interested in the plight of Asian turtles, because our greatest natural catastrophes and our greatest war against our planet is taking place in Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, where these turtles, and there's so many really beautiful turtles that live there, but many of them are being extinguished by the day. So I participate with zoos and researchers and trying to propagate some of the very rare ones and make a contribution financially when I can and so on. And I've written a couple of books about that. A new one that I'm working on right now, in fact.
Oh, another book.
Oh, there's 4 more in the pipe after Mad Monk Manifesto, but we'll talk about Manifesto tonight because the others, you can't get them yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
You're quite busy with writing then. That is definitely a passion of yours?
Okay, so we were talking about childhood, and you like the trajectory of journey to start as early as possible. So I'll give you a couple of things from childhood that address that observation. I remember that I got a bad report card one time. I was in 4th grade, so I think that's 9. A lot of things happened when I was 9, and I remember going into my father's study. I'll talk about my dad in a minute, but I remember going into his study. He was an intimidating guy. And he said, look, I see this report card and it says, that you're not living up to your potential. And then I said, I don't know what that means. He said, well, it means that you're not going to be a doctor like me, and you're not going to be a lawyer like my friend Jeff, and you're not going to be a captain of industry like my friend Joe, but instead you're going to be a doorman. And I lived in a Manhattan apartment building with a doorman. And now, retrospectively, I realized that he was probably always drunk. But at the time, I didn't think about that. I just thought about the fact that his name was Eddie. And he seemed to have a good life. He seemed always happy, and he helped you, and he had to carry stuff. And he would walk the dog for you in the pouring rain or the snow. And he helped people and got taxis for them and this and that. And I couldn't imagine that this was a very bad life at all. It seemed pretty good to me, but I knew better somehow than to say that to my dad. So instead, I said, I'm reading this novel, Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. And my father looked at me, and again, I realize now that I was probably very little of Ivanhoe that I understood at 9 years old, but I was reading it or trying to. And I said, that guy, Walter Scott, he determines who loves who lives, who dies, who uses the sword and who dies by the sword, who's rich and who's poor. Whatever it is he does, I want to do that. He's kind of like God. And that was the end of my bad report card conversation, because I stopped my dad in his tracks. So apparently I wanted to be a novelist, storyteller, right from the get-go.
It's always been embedded in you.
So it seems. So
after all of these writings, absolutely.
Yeah, 22 books now, I think, 15 of them published and the rest on the way. So my dad was a very famous physician. He was the world's most famous cardiologist. Listeners may recognize his name and may have seen him because he was on Fox News as the Sunday house call doctor for many years. But when I was growing up, his name was Dr. Isidore Rosenfeld. And when I was growing up, because of his luminous reputation, he had as his patients the people who in those days ran the world. So they were kings and presidents and princes and captains of industry, moguls of Hollywood, stars, artists, writers, thinkers, scientists. And those people were in a constant parade through our New York City home. And after a few years of watching them, I had the realization one day that it's funny, because it seems that I've been told that those people represent everything that all of us should want to be and want out of life. They have celebrity, fame, they have wealth, they have good fortune, they have power, they have charisma, and on and on. And yet, I didn't really see too much difference between them and everybody else, other than the fact that they had more money. And I certainly didn't see them as enlightened individuals or anything special, although there were a few great folks in there, but many of them were just sort of miserable, depressed people who were sick. And, one of them I remember threw his wife down the stairs. Another one went to jail for tax evasion. Some of them were in and out of trouble. They didn't get along with their kids. There didn't seem to be anything that I would want to emulate in most cases. And so when I saw that this model that I was being given about life and about people and about what we should want and work for and achieve and hope to be didn't really match reality, I wondered what other bills of goods we were being sold about politics, career, family, love. And so, you can imagine, as I said before, what a great joy I was to my parents, but I just questioned everything, and I began looking around for answers that I was not getting from the community I was raised in.
So your curiosity began at such a very young age. I know kids are curious by nature, but yours seems like it was a lot more deep in curiosity than an average child.
As I look back, I think a whole other level.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
It makes sense where your path led you.
Yeah, so my mother was a student of philosophy, so I'm sure that's where I got it. And she was a student of the famous Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. And she had a pretty good library of philosophy books, and I delved into them early on looking for answers to things. And I was inexplicably drawn to writings from the East. So, before I was in my teens, I was reading Buddhist texts, Taoist texts, Confucian texts, and the Vedas and everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm entirely sure that I didn't understand anything of what I was reading, but yet there was some kind of energetic thing. And AJ, my sense of you is that you operate in a world where you understand what I mean when I say that. And so I just felt some draw to it, and that draw, went through many iterations, but it refined. I can tell you a couple of things specifically that I remember. There was in the 1970s a television show called Kung Fu with the actor David Carradine in the starring role. And most people liked to watch that for the simple Hollywood trajectory that each episode offered, meaning, the peaceful wandering monk tries to avoid trouble, tries to avoid trouble, tries to avoid trouble, tries to avoid trouble, and then in Act 3, he kicks butt. And that's what everybody seemed to like about that show. And David Carradine's a wonderful actor, but his martial arts were execrable, and I wasn't really particularly interested in that part. I just loved the scenes of the Shaolin Temple, these flashbacks to when he had been a monk in China before he came to the United States and wandered the American West. And in those Shaolin scenes, there were robed monks walking around with their hands folded, and I was transfixed by them. I remember this, so many years later. And there was one in particular who was blind, but he could hear a cricket break wind at 100 paces, and he could, kick butt all up, down, and center all day long. But he had such a great sense of equanimity and peace. And I remember thinking, wow, that is just a completely, not only a different way of life, but a different mind than anybody I know or anything around me. And how interesting that there is that in the world. I can't tell you, I would love to tell you, but I can't tell you honestly that I thought in those days that, boy, I would like to be a monk, but I was fascinated by them.
So that wasn't in your radar when you first observed how they were?
No, I just wanted to know. What was on my radar was I wanted to know what they knew.
Yeah.
I wanted to have that peace. Mm-hmm. I was also, a little relatively rich boy in New York, and I was mugged constantly every couple of weeks. Street gangs would take my, sometimes I saved up 25 cents. I got a nickel a week as an allowance. And sometimes that was taken away from me. I'd be on the way to the store to buy something I'd been wanting, a plastic model or a toy of some kind, and I would be approached and things would be taken from me. So I remember thinking that it wouldn't be bad to have that martial capability too, but that wasn't the primary thing that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I know as a child, like looking at the martial art part of it, it looks fun and exciting. And of course, you'd want the self-defense aspect. But there is a deeper mindset that comes along with any type of martial arts.
So violence, is the lowest common denominator of human interaction. And the more proficient and experienced, the more proficient at it you become, and the more experience you have with it, the more you realize that and how fundamentally uninteresting it is. But what you say about the path involved in the rectification of our spirit and our bodies, that part is very compelling, and it's an onion that we peel over and over.
Constantly.
Yep, constantly.
We were having to talk about ego last night, a group of friends and I, and how when you think that you have woke, that you had your awakening, you have no idea that you will constantly be in that experience over and over again, just like an onion. You'll always be awakening once you have woke.
So, this idea of enlightenment is, I think, greatly misunderstood. And as you say, this is generally not a switch, but a process.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I've always been uncomfortable with, being called honorifics of any kind. I remember some national magazine wrote a profile piece on me some years ago, and they referred to me by my American name. And I just asked them all through it to change an A to an I and change master to Mr. And they were so upset that I asked them for that. And I took this question to my teacher, and he laughed so hard at me, and he said, "Ha ha ha, just marketing." My master, he said, the definition of a master is that when your master tells you you're a master. And I said, okay, but you don't even call yourself master, and our grandmaster doesn't call himself master. We call him that, but he doesn't call him that. And I can't wrap my head around that. And he just sort of smacked me upside the head and said, "Don't think about these things."
Yes, just like that. Don't think about them.
Yes. Funny.
Well, so far, there's so many questions that I want to know as a child, because when I was a curious child myself, but even after your childhood, your life has just gone in a different direction with your curiosity and I'm sure your passion to want to live a much different life, seeing how you observed one way and really adored another way that you observed. But we're going to take a break, and when we get back, I'd love to hear more about how that path, how your journey took you to that space that you are in now. But we are Soul Wandering with monk Yun Rou this evening, and there is still more to come. So be sure to stay close. We'll be right back, guys. Hello, welcome back to Soul Wanderings. Tonight our guest is monk Yun Rou, and he is here to share his journey story, because that is what Soul Wanderings is all about. I am very happy to have you here, and I love that we have some similarities, like the turtles and the curiosity and asking questions at such a young age. It's very relatable to me. So when you have those types of experiences, it's always nice to know that you're not alone. You're not the odd one out, because you ask so many questions and want to know why and how and what and all of those things. Thank you for sharing with us some of your childhood observation experiences.
So I think that sense that everything that I see people doing around me is a puzzlement. Maybe not everything, but many things that I see them doing is a puzzlement. Has persisted to this day. It's a little more refined now as an observation, because I understand more about social and cultural programming. I have a different perspective on that than I did as a child when I didn't know what those things were. But now I see many forces at work on us. And there's a wonderful story about a frog at the bottom of a well. And the story is told by a great Taoist sage, one of the 2 or 3 most famous that has persisted into the modern era. His name is Zhuangzi. And Zhuangzi, speculates about the frog in the bottom of the well and what he can see of the sky and constrained view. He also talks about the fish who doesn't know that he's in water, doesn't know what water is, has no concept of water. and certainly has no concept of not water unless somebody hooks him. So I think that we have a job to do with our brain, and that is to become more sophisticated and aware of the number of filters at work in our sensorium, and to become aware of how little we are actually seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, feeling, touching, all that of the world around us because of our great biological limitations. So much is made nationally about like America being the greatest country. Much is made religiously about mankind being the center and the pinnacle and all that, and God's image and so on. But in fact, what I notice most about human beings is their tremendous limitations. We don't see even a tiny portion of the wavelengths of light that are available in the universe, and the same can be said about sounds and everything else. We're not aware that we're constantly being bombarded by cosmic radiation particles that are going through us at massive speeds as we sit and chat right now. Mm-hmm. And we're not aware of all that because our brain prohibits us from seeing it. Because if we did see it, we would be so overwhelmed by all the input that we would not be able to function. Mm. And, they say that some forms of autism and ADHD and that sort of thing are failures of these filters. And yet, at the same time, I think that removing the filters selectively, carefully, knowingly, deliberately, is a big part of what you earlier described as awakening. And we have to be guided or trained to how to do this correctly, otherwise we could have some problems. But there are numerous traditions of such training. Taoism is just one tradition. And as we remove those filters, we begin to see more and more and more of the world around us. Mm-hmm. And as we do that, we realize eventually we reach a point which I suppose is as good a definition of awakening as any, and that is we reach the point where we realize that there is no difference between us and the world around us. So not only is there no difference between us and other human beings, but there's no difference between us and the turtles. There's no difference between us and the ant. There's no difference between us and the planet. And this awareness of oneness, this awareness of the lack of delineation and border between ourselves and the world around us is for most people an extremely rare experience. Mm-hmm. It can happen during intense lovemaking. It can happen during a sort of a peak experience moment in sports or in a near-death experience. But for most folks, it's either they never have that experience or they have it very rarely in their lives and they remember it. And then years later, they sort of diss it or doubt it or banish it. Mm-hmm. And so the removal of filters that stand in the way between us and that realization is our work. And once we've achieved that sense that all these distinctions are false, that we don't even end at the end of our skin, that in fact there's radiant energy coming off of us. There are clouds of bacteria following us wherever we go that are on our breath and in our perspiration that create an aura that can be 1 or 2 feet off our body everywhere we go. And that's not even talking about pheromones and these external hormones that our body produces, but just the physiology of the metabolism of living. So there are so many ways in which we are misled and misunderstand who and what we are. And in the face of all that misunderstanding and then a waking up to it, the scurrying about that people do, the miniature wars and the vicissitudes of ego, all these things just seem kind of silly.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a lot of. You really do. You take inventory and take stock on when you start questioning what this experience is about. Those things are very trivial.
They're very trivial. And one of the things that I talk about in Mad Monk Manifesto is this idea of trading a non-renewable resource for a renewable one, which is a really bad idea. And in this case, the non-renewable resource is time, and the renewable one is money. So money comes and goes. We make it, we spend it, we lose it, we make it, we find it, we are given it, we lose it, we spend it. But time, the moments that we spent at the very beginning of this show, for example, those are gone irretrievably, right? So whatever little laugh we had half an hour ago, boom, gone, finished. Any great memory that you have of being with somebody or somewhere, or of something great happening, any of those things are irretrievable. Your time is the defining quality of your life. We're born, we get old, we get sick, and we die. And that journey is what defines us, not what color our skin is, or what our belief system is, or who our family is, or where we live, or how much money we make, or any of the other things that people are so preoccupied with.
Right. What's your belief on the reasoning behind those things that people are so preoccupied with? I've heard so many beliefs in this regards, as far as, numbing us or controlling us, or whatever that looks like, for us not to have this awakening of knowing that we are all interconnected.
So there's this thing in Taoism called yin-yang theory, and if our listeners have ever seen the little interlocking yin-yang symbol, the fish, the black and white, sometimes you see it on surfboards, and it's popular in surf culture, but it's everywhere, really. There's a lot to say about that symbol. But for the moment, let me just say that it implies that there's this dynamic, harmonious interplay between opposing forces that creates our reality. So when you ask me, where do these delusions and traps come from, the answer is yin and yang. The answer is some of them come from within because we are willing to accept them, and some of them come from without because they are being foisted upon us by people who do not have our best interests at heart. So those people could range from our bosses to our government, even sadly to friends and family who don't realize what they're doing to us, corporations, large forces that have an agenda that is not the same as our agenda, but they want us to think it is so that we will not resist them. So I read, over the last few weeks, I read two very sad, particularly for me, articles about the plight of the writer in American anti-culture. I don't consider that America has a culture. We're only a 200-year-old marketplace, so there's not really any time for a culture. But our anti-culture, our society, has relegated writers to some great majority of them live below the poverty line, and the amount of money that writers make, the mean number, and just is off the top of my head, but has been plummeting. This came out today, has been plummeting so that now the average writer makes $3,000 on a book, which of course is could take a year or two to write, and that is not a living wage.
Right. Absolutely not.
And the reason why this is happening, aside from the obvious presence of the internet and the competition for eyeballs with so many different types of entertainment and communication, but the real reason it's happening is that things like the internet and tech messages and the weapons of mass distraction that are being leveled at us all the time, those forces have in mind only their own perpetuation. They want to keep on doing what they're doing so that they can monetize our eyeballs when it comes to screen time. They can monetize our energy when it comes to work. They can monetize our creativity when it comes to using that for commercial purposes, and on and on. And so the biggest threat to these forces at work on us, whether we're talking about governments or corporations or social groups, the biggest threat is that we stop and do what we are doing tonight together, which is we think deeply about things. Mm-hmm. And most writers choose to write because they want the time and opportunity to think deeply about something. Mm-hmm. And thinking deeply cannot happen if we have lost the ability to concentrate, if we're being entrained by our so-called smartphones, the most addictive device yet conceived by humanity.
Absolutely.
If we're being enticed by hyperlinks and our attention spans are shrinking to flea-like levels. And so if all that's happening to us, which it is, and we don't unplug and take time to be in nature and think deeply about anything or just to be quiet, then we won't realize what's going on and we will not rebel against the status quo.
So what is your advice to those who want something different for themselves than being programmed or manipulated in that way, other than put your phone down and get out into nature? Because those are very addictive things and easily to get obsessed and involved with.
So, whenever I'm asked this question, I have to answer with something that a lot of people don't like to hear, because in our speed and greed world, people often don't like to take responsibility for their own outcomes, and it's fun to point fingers, and it's easy to blame other people and their circumstances and so on. And this refrain from whining and complaining to being angry or feeling entitled has become an awfully big slice of the American pie, culturally and personality-wise. But, in truth, it just takes a moment of decision in your own head that, I don't want to turn on the TV now. I'm not going to pick up my phone. I'm not going to click on my web browser and go on social media or surf. I'm actually going to go upstairs and take a hot bath with a book. And I'm going to light a candle, and I'm going to turn down the lights, and I'm going to be quiet and watch my eyes as they race across the page, realize that I've read the last 4 pages and have no idea what I just read, and I've got to go back and do that again. And I got to watch myself doing that a few times until I settle down my concentration, actually go back to the beginning of the chapter, read that first paragraph again, and see what it actually says. And once you begin to do that, you've taken the easiest steps and the most, when I say the easiest, I mean the most direct countervailing measures to gain your concentration and focus regain your concentration, gain it back. And so, this is one of the reasons that I like books, that I've always loved books since I was a kid. It wasn't that they were the only way to learn. Taoism is full of global learning techniques that involve movement and meditation and philosophy and all kinds of things that we can talk about. But for listeners here now, this is really a very simple and handy and accessible step to everyone, and it doesn't cost money, and it's just a matter of a simple decision. Mm-hmm. So, tomorrow night when you come home, rather than flopping down for your customary 5 hours in front of the tube, which is, I guess, what most people spend watching TV every day, which is an unimaginable number to me, but that's just me. Oh my
goodness.
Yeah, 5 hours. And then people say, but I don't have time to exercise, or I don't have time to go outside, or I don't have time to walk the dog. That's why I peed in the corner, because they're sitting there, addicted to mesmerized. That's a perfect word. Thank you. By the television or by the glowing screen of their computer. Mm-hmm. And really, it is really helpful for our health just to not do that and to turn off and disconnect. And there is this thing that I've been told is called FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. Not being someone who experiences that, and not being someone who is very involved in watching what other people are doing on social media. I only learned about it a year or so ago, maybe two. But this idea that, if you're not online, things are unfolding without you. And to that I say, welcome to the world, because through all of history, we have our lives and other people have their lives, and what goes on in their lives is unfolding without us. And so what? Why would we care? So this is the subtle art of not giving an F about that sort of thing. And that's very different from not giving an F about people in general, or about the state of the environment, or about our country, or about our world, or about turtles for that matter. Mm-hmm. It's about not caring about things that really you have no business caring about, as opposed to not caring about things that you must care about.
Right. Oh, good stuff. Thank you for sharing. This topic actually has brought up a couple of questions in the chat room. One of which, going back just a little bit in the conversation, they wanted to know, I believe Blue asked this question, so do the overlords fear us awakening, or is it too late?
These are two separate questions and not intimately related, actually. So they do fear us awakening, and they do want us never to think deeply, and they keep us hopping and jumping with everything from easy credit and easy terms to enticing us into the strong desire to own things, buy things we don't need with money we don't have, and thus keep us in thrall. And so, step one is don't use credit cards. You can use them as cash, but better use a debit card, right, for convenience. But don't borrow money. And when and if you borrow money, do it because you actually have to, not because you want to. Mm-hmm. So, some people do it. When I say want to, pretty much nobody likes to get credit card debt, but they get it because they think that they need that big screen TV, or they need that new car and all that. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to my description of childhood for me, and experiences of realizing that, what everybody said we should want and have was not actually a particularly fruitful or accurate picture of what life really has to offer on a deep level. So, this begs the question, what might we want instead? Or what might we see as ways to spend our time? So cultivating our discipline, our focus, our talents, our passions, engaging the three Taoist treasures of compassion, frugality, and humility in everything we do. Seeing ourselves and our lives as the work of art that we want to do beautifully. This does not involve the limitations of options that is entailed when we burden ourselves with a whole bunch of stuff. It does not involve being monomaniacally focused on getting something or getting somewhere, but rather living in what the Taoist calls Wu Wei. That's spelled W-U-W-E-I. And it translates roughly as free and easy wandering. And it implies a life spent going with the flow, being maximally efficient and effective, getting the most results with the least effort. And this is not, by the way, to suggest that we be lazy or we lie around and be a bum or spend all day watching the ball game and say, look, I'm free and easy. No, it's not that. It's about developing a great sensitivity through the observation and study of nature to the way the world actually works, and then acting in accordance with those laws and forces we detect, that we have come to be able to detect through the work we do on ourselves. The last part of that question was, do I think it's too late? And the answer is, it's always too late, and it's never too late. So it depends what it is you're after or what expectation you have. But the most useful response is, don't worry about such things. Just get to work.
Just get to work. Yes, exactly. And I say that all of the time. We worry about so many things that are literally out of our control. And of course, there are some things that we can do, which refers to get to work, the get to work part. But just ridding ourselves of the thoughts and behaviors that don't serve us and doing the work will substantially change our reality.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that leaves us at a good place to take a break because it's that time. And I do have another question when we get back in regards to the same thing. And then I'd like to move on from there and learn a little more about your practices. And of course, we want to talk about your newest book. So you guys will be right back. Welcome back to Soul Wanderings, which is heard here on kgraradio.com, as well as many other platforms for your convenience, such as iTunes, TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker, just to name a few. So wherever you guys are joining us from tonight, welcome. We're happy to have you here wandering with us this evening. We have been visiting with monk Yun Rou. He's a Taoist monk, a Tai Chi master, although maybe we should say mister, and an author. And we're 1 hour into our wandering and have the opportunity for another hour. I'm so happy about that.
Me too.
I said mister because I believe during the break you were making a reference to not a master, but a mister.
Yeah, I think we said it during the chat. I don't know, maybe not. Yeah, you're right.
But that is a powerful word, and I can see how you would want to change that. Being as humble as you are.
So, ego is necessary and useful. It's the out of balance ego that's the problem. It's a deluded or self-aggrandizing ego. It's a narcissistic ego. Ego by itself is just, that construct of the brain that allows us to move through the world.
Well, ego definitely is necessary to a certain degree. Before we went to our break, we were talking about awakening and ways that we can get away from the different social media platforms, the television and whatnot. And I did have one more question from the chat room. And like I said, I'd like to move on at this point, but we have Libertas who is wondering, how do we counteract the conditioning that occurs through our educational system?
So first, let's label that correctly and say through our anti-educational system.
Oh,
so that's job one is to make clear that it is an indoctrination system, not an education system. Only in rare cases, maybe some Montessori and some other alternative methods of learning, do people actually learn how to learn and how to love learning, and or have better their natural native love of learning enhanced and reinforced. So one thing that we have to recognize, the very first step, and I think I mentioned this in Mad Monk Manifesto, but so many things come and go, but I believe I do. The very first step in any spiritual pursuit, and when we talk about awakening or we talk about breaking the constraints of our programming, I consider that to be a spiritual pursuit. So anytime you want to elevate yourself like that, the very first thing that we all need to do is to recognize that something is going on. So give me a moment so that you can see where I'm going with this and how it applies to your question. But whether it is in the quiet of a closet, which is the only place we can find in our house where we don't hear leaf blowers and traffic and barking dogs and people screaming, or it's out on the ocean floating with the engine turned off, or in the sailboat, or it's in the middle of the forest or the jungle, just sitting down, not in the ant nest, and recognizing for a few moments that if you just stand still and do nothing, you become immediately aware that around you and through you and including you, something is going on. So this forward motion, this unfolding, which we can see on so many different levels, is perceiving that unfolding is job one. Number one, it takes you out of yourself. Number two, it addresses the question of how do I break the constraints of my programming? We're not going to break them. We're just going to sidestep them for a moment and go in a different direction. The programming can remain in place. It's better not to struggle against it. It's just a smarter idea to go, okay, I've got that programming, but I want to pursue for a little bit, what is this thing about something is going on here? What actually is happening around me as molecules move and atoms combust and stars form and die and planets circle each other and galaxies spiral and ants form their little raiding parties and birds fly and fish swim. What is going on? And just the act of asking this and of identifying the large scale of this enormous, glorious process around us helps us to put into perspective the tiny importance of such things as programming that has been impressed upon us. So we don't have to fight it. We just have to realize, it's pretty unimportant and I don't need it.
Very good. Very good. It is being aware, definitely being aware. Uh, let's move on from this. It's a really great topic, and we could talk about this the entire show, I'm pretty sure. But more about your journey story. You are a Taoist monk. Tell me about that journey and how that all began for you.
Well, so we talked about watching monks on TV.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at one point when I was ordained a number of years ago in southern China, it was a couple of days worth of ritual chanting and obeisance, and the ritual was conducted by my abbot, who is a very charismatic fellow. I remember at one point thinking that I understand how Catholic people feel about the Pope when I look at this guy and if he just smiles beatifically at me, I crumple. So, I mean, it's just, one of the things I remember about becoming the actual act of ordination was how I felt about him and his attention to me as I was going through this. So there was this moment that I had with him when I said, I feel a little bit of an imposter. And he looked at me in surprise. He said, why? I said, well, I'm not Chinese, and this is a Chinese philosophy / religion. And I spend time in the monastery, but I don't live here full time. And I look around and these other monks, they're here sweeping the floor, or they're working in the kitchen, or they're doing the garden, or they're leading the chants, or they're leading the martial arts practice, or they're leading meditation, or doing it. And I'm, I come here and I do these things with you, but then I go back to the U.S. And of course now, with the relationship between the U.S. and China and the rise of tyranny in China and being an outspoken critic of the Chinese regime on social media, which I feel compelled to do because we have to stand up against such things. My return to China anytime soon is very questionable. Anyway, I said this to him, and I said, so, he looks at me and he says, how long have you been on this path? And this was quite some years ago, but I said, well, 30-something years. And he said, so these monks you're talking about, most of them are young guys, and they come here for 7 years. And they do that. They come here because they want to study, and they come from wealthy families. And if you're not from a wealthy family, you can't be a Taoist monk in China, because that sort of renunciate thing doesn't really fly in China, and particularly not with Taoist temples. Because in China, you don't have the luxury of doing something like that. If you're a man, particularly, sad but true in that culture, you have to provide for your family and work and support and take care of everybody, your parents and your kids and all that. So if you are not wealthy, you simply cannot afford to be a monk. It's not an option. You can't just throw up your hand and say, I don't want to participate in society. I'm going to go be a monk. That is kind of a stereotype that doesn't really exist in modern China. So he said to me, these guys are here for 7 years. And at night they go home, in their Mercedes with their Rolexes to their families, and then they're bright and early, they're back. He said, but they're supported by a culture and a tradition that goes back thousands of years in this country. And you haven't been in this country all your life, and you are not supported by that, and you are not part of that tradition. You sought this out, and you did it on your own without the support of anybody around you. You forged your own path, and you engaged the practices of Qigong and Tai Chi Chuan and meditation and so on. And you learned the classics, and you did all this, on your own. And I said, well, I didn't do it on my own. I did it with teachers. And he said, okay, but you were self-motivated. There was nothing propping you up. Anyway, you are not an imposter. And of course, when he said this to me, I just completely burst into tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The acceptance and the dedication on your part as well.
And it never felt like any of that. It just felt like, doing what I thought was important. I remember that one of the last memories I have of my dad, who passed away last year, was he largely lost his memory and his thinking wasn't too clear. And he wasn't totally demented, but he was certainly diminished. And he said to me one day, "You're a Taoist monk." And I said, "Yes, Dad." And he said, when did that happen? How did that happen? And I pulled up the internet and I showed him a 1-minute clip on YouTube of my ordination, just a little excerpt from it. And there I am in my robes and my hat, and I'm chanting, and he's looking at a room full of Chinese and me. And he says, "Which one is you?" And I said, "The bald one with the big nose who's not Chinese, Dad." And he looks a little more closely. He goes, "Ah." And he squints his eyes and he says, "So you traveled all the way over there and you became a Taoist monk." And I'm wincing because this is, I had many, many years of being told that, if you're not a physician, you're nothing. And my dad had a very strict and narrow view of things. And I was generally not kindly received. And my adventures were seen with a great deal of jaundice in the expression. But he looks at this and he looks back and forth between this thing on the YouTube and me. And he says, "Wow, you're fantastic." And it was such a completely unexpected reversal of the norm. I was floored, and it's a very fond memory because I didn't get too much of that from my dad, and now sadly he's gone. Yeah.
Happy memories.
It is, yeah.
That feels so good. You now are monk Yun Rou. How did that come about, the name? Like how are you given that name, and what does it mean?
I was hoping for something like titanium manhood or iron fist, but what I got was soft cloud.
Soft cloud.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I confess that when I first heard it, my master looked at me and he saw a little bit of chagrin on my face. And he says, a cloud floating in the sky is a very wonderful Taoist image. You go with the wind, you go wherever the wind blows you. It's a quintessential Taoist idea. And I said, uh-huh. And he said, and also, softness is very important. We train it so hard and so strenuously, ironically, in the martial arts to relax and be soft so that you can be quick and responsive and sensitive. And I said, uh-huh. And he sees that he's not really getting it for me. And so he keeps going and he says, and sometimes the cloud makes rain and it brings life to living things. And I guess I perk up a little bit at that. And since he's on a roll and sees he's having success with this line of reasoning, he goes, and when it's absolutely necessary, the cloud can produce thunder and lightning and hail. And then I'm happy and clapping. And he sees, boy, how much work I really have to do.
And then you can be lightning and thunder. So, but what a beautiful name to be given. There, I feel like it sounds light and fluffy, no pun intended, but there's power behind it. And not in an egotistical way, but it's very beautiful.
Thank you. I've actually come to love it so much. I don't use my American name at all anymore. I mean, school friends and family still call me Arthur, the name I was born with too, but I don't use it.
Well, this one obviously suits you very well.
Thank you.
How long were you actually practicing Taoism before you decided to go down the journey of being a monk?
So I don't even know, I don't even know that I decided. I think maybe, I had a very successful television show about Tai Chi. You mentioned it in the intro, and there were really, it had a very big audience. And the Chinese government, people in that world watch us carefully, and they also are very supportive and appreciative when we express our love for traditional Chinese culture, which Taoism is. Mm-hmm. And I should hasten to add that it has nothing to do with the repressive and tyrannical regime in power in China in the modern day, nor did it really have anything to do with, the rigors and horrors of imperial China. And we can, maybe this is a good time, if you think so, to talk about what Taoism is.
Yes, absolutely. That was going to be my next question.
So listeners, Americans, and especially, know a great deal more about Taoism than they know that they know. And that is on account of the good works of Mr. George Lucas and the Star Wars universe that he created based on the juxtaposition in Chinese history and culture between the Confucianists and the Taoists, which he iterated and expressed as the Empire and the Rebels. So if you have some familiarity with Star Wars, you're a little bit ahead of the game. And if you think of the clone armies, and you think of the Death Star, and you think of Darth Vader, and you think of tyranny and oppression and the use of force and regimentation and rules and violence and all that, darkness. And then you think of the rebels living among the trees with the Ewoks and the Wookiees and living in caves and wearing robes and carrying swords. You realize that the Taoist master, the Jedi master, is a Taoist master or a Tai Chi master. And the Taoist sage is, Yoda was a Taoist sage, and this veneration of nature, this desire to go with the flow, the desire to live freely without oppression, and to be able to, as the early Taoists did back more than 2 millennia ago, live lives of, bacchanalian revelry in the forest, meditating in caves, and having orgies, and drinking, and thinking, and writing poetry, and playing music. And so, there's a lot of that in the Taoist tradition. There's also a lot of scholarship and artistry and deep philosophical thought.
Is there a difference between Taoism and Taoism?
There's a D and a T.
Right.
So they are the same.
Okay.
So at one point, I want to clear up, you referred to me early in the broadcast as a deist monk. So interestingly, a deist is someone who believes in God. Taoists, in their animistic religion, and this is, we can go down this path a bit too far for this program, so I'm going to keep it very brief. But let me say that the earliest Taoism was shamanistic animism. It was watching and learning from nature and trying to figure out ways for us to live in accordance with the principles and forces observed by those early students of nature. At some point when Buddhism came to China, this sort of native folk philosophy of China encountered a foreign force that immediately took root in China because Buddhism offered something that Taoism didn't. It offered this idea of karma and the wheel of samsara, which is being reincarnated over and over again so that you could improve your position. In short, it offered the belief in an afterlife that would make the sufferings of the day more tolerable, just like the Abrahamic faiths do, by suggesting that this life is not all there is, and that if you do good things and you accrue karma, or in the Abrahamic sense, you the judgment day, you reach the pearly gates and you're rewarded. Mm-hmm. And Taoism doesn't have any of that. Taoism, traditional, philosophical, original, authentic Taoism, before it became an institutional religion somewhere in the 1st century of the Common Era, it didn't really have any of those ideas. It didn't seek to explain what happened after we die. It talked about things in terms of cosmic energies. You return to the source from which you came. There's a very sophisticated cosmogony, that is origin story, and cosmology, that is a study of how the cosmos works. But it doesn't involve such a clear thing as heaven and hell and, karma and all that. It's more about how we live in the days that we are alive, according to the way of nature. Mm-hmm. And that is the tradition that I follow as a Taoist monk. So I do some rituals for people, and I do weddings and funerals and certain Taoist animistic things, which I like and I choose to do because they enhance our engagement with nature. But it was hard for Taoism to compete when the idea of an afterlife was offered to people who were suffering. And so when that happened, Taoism sort of, changed its shoes. And it said, okay, let's try to dance the way they're dancing. And it began to talk about all these different deities that you could bow to. And it became more Hindu-esque in that sense. Every forest, every tree, every river had a god, and you could pray to them, and you could expect things from them, and this offered a dialogue with the supernatural, which hadn't existed exactly that way before. So because of what I'm describing, there is, to this day, some argument / confusion about whether Taoism is a philosophy or religion. And when people ask me which it is, they say, is it a philosophy or a religion? I say yes. So you can embrace what piece of it you want.
You did bring up Buddhism a little bit in your definition of what Taoism is, and a little bit of the difference, but what is the difference between the two?
So, one important idea is karma. The other important idea is that there was an early leader who was referred to as the awakened one, the Buddha. We think there's I think there's much more likelihood, much more evidence for the historicity of Siddhartha Gautama, the Indian or Nepalese person we call the Buddha now, then there is evidence for the existence of Lao Tzu, the putative sage, Taoist sage who wrote the famous Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching. There's probably more historicity and archaeological and anthropological evidence for the existence of the Buddha than there is for figures in the Bible. But so, I, for one, pretty much accept that there was a character called the Buddha. But we have this wonderful text in Taoism, this so-called Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu. So people see that as spelled Laotzu, sometimes Laotse, sometimes Laozi. And that, by the way, addresses your question about the difference between Taoism and Taoism. When we tried to transliterate Chinese, over the years there have been quite a few different systems to anglicize and transliterate Chinese characters into a Western alphabet. Yale, my alma mater, has its own system. There's a really famous one called the Wade-Giles system, and that's the system from which the word Taoism with a T arose, that spelling of the word. But the Chinese government has actually issued its own official transliteration system called Pinyin, P-I-N-Y-I-N. And in that one, which we honor their wishes by using most of the time these days in the West, Taoism is spelt with a D.
Oh, I see. That's why there are so many. There's a lot of things about you on the internet, and some are pronounced with the D, some are pronounced with the T. So that clears that up quite a bit.
Yep, that's it. Same thing, just two different spellings.
Wonderful. Well, we are going to take our last break for the evening, and when we return, we will wrap up this wandering with Monk Yun Rou's latest book, Mad Monk Manifesto, a prescription for evolution, revolution, and global awakening. Welcome back to Soul Wanderings on KGRA Radio. I am AJ Rasmussen. I'm your host of Soul Wanderings. And tonight we are wandering with Monk Yun Rou. And during the break, we had a little conversation and some giggles, and you wanted me to bring up humor. I know we're going to talk about your book, but before the show gets away, you brought up humor and then a story about your grandmother. So we'd love for you to share those things with us. And then definitely, let's talk about your book.
So years ago, when I opened a martial arts school in San Diego, California, my grandmother came out to visit. And I took her, she was Canadian, she was from Montreal. And my dad was at that time on his own TV show in LA, and she came out to visit him. And then I drove up and brought her down to San Diego to spend a little time with me. And one night I brought her to my martial arts school, and I set up a little folding chair in the back of the room, and she sat there and watched the class. And after, 90 minutes or so, the class was over and the students left, and I'm mopping the blood and sweat off the floor. And she's watching me, and I say, so Granny, what did you think? And she looks at me, my Jewish grandmother. She says, nothing. She nods. So I say, I ask you what you think and you nod? And she nods again. And I said, don't you have anything to say? She says, nice. I said, so 90 minutes you watched and you have one word, nice? She says, very nice. I said, you're giving me 2 words after 90 minutes. Why don't you tell me what you really think? She said, what I really think? I said, yeah. She says, the punching and the jumping, the kicking and the screaming. This is for the Gentiles. This is not for you.
Oh my God.
And you can imagine that, when word came of me becoming a monk, her response was, why do you hate me?
Oh.
Yeah. So, we have a great tradition of humor in Taoism. And I find first of all, the Zhuangzi, the famous Taoist sage who wrote the eponymous, arguably the first novel in Chinese history, the Zhuangzi. I find his stories are full of humor, and there's just wonderful stuff in there. And then there is a sort of a psycho-physical dimension to humor in Taoist practice, because Taoist practice requires us to relax physically. And it's very difficult to relax when you are tense and fearful when you feel you're being judged or you're in competition. So I try in all my classes to, I tell jokes, I do physical comedy. I want everybody, laughing so that they don't even realize after 3 hours of exercise how much work they've done until the class is over and they go, oh my God, my legs are killing me.
Yeah, the next day.
Yeah, and then the next day, I get, I hate you so much emails and texts, I can't, what did you do to me? I can't get out of bed. But while they're doing the work, we are entertaining ourselves. I don't want to represent that I'm just entertaining them. The community is entertaining. There's a lot of, everybody's joking around. And yet, somehow there is enough structure to actually get the hard work done. And this is in some ways what I referred to earlier as Wu Wei, that sort of free and easy wandering, that you don't realize how many thousands of meters you've climbed up the mountain because you have been so enjoying the view.
It is about the journey, isn't it?
All about the journey. But, but that's not enough to say that, right? Because you could be miserable in the journey. And in this context, I'm saying that, we want to be joyful in the journey.
Yeah, exactly. So beautiful. Tell us about your book. This is your latest book, and am I correct in saying it's your 15th book? But earlier you said you had 4 more on the way, so you were closer.
Yeah, so that's right. This is the 15th published one, I believe, and as I inclined down the path of my Taoist practice over the last, I want to say since maybe 2000, I published books well before that, but I really wanted to start to juxtapose or integrate, as a better word, the view of the world that I was learning and my fascination with Chinese history and culture and philosophy with my craft. So, I wrote a few novels that, and I've got a few more coming out that are about Chinese history and philosophy, and even some in this new silk punk genre, which juxtaposes sort of martial arts and fantasy and history and politics, and hopefully people will find them entertaining. Mad Monk Manifesto, the book we're talking about now, was born out of certain feelings that arose in me watching the election results in 2016 and seeing in such clear, stark relief the forces at work in our country and the fractionating of our country. And so I began to sort of rant a bit, and I felt like I wanted to write down some of those rants. And after a while, I showed the rants to my then agent, and he said, I think this should go ahead of some of the novels and some of the other things we have in the can, including some that have movie deals and whatnot, because I think the country really needs this book right now. So I turned those, I gave some structure to the ranting and raving, and what I did for that structure was to create a utopian handbook of inspiration and ideas for people to carry around in their purses, briefcases, backpacks, back pockets. We deliberately made it a size that was easy to carry, and have it be a useful work for reminding us what we want to shoot for in our personal lives and in culture and society. So the structure of the book follows the idea that, the very Taoist idea, that in order to have an enlightened mind, we have to have a strong and healthy body. And that in order to take care of others, we have to take care of ourselves, like the airline thing about, putting on your own oxygen mask before you help anybody else, because obviously if you're gasping for air and dying, you're not going to be of much use. So the metaphor that I most often use to describe this book is it's like dropping a stone into the pond. You can control that trajectory of the stone if you're throwing it or dropping it. You can pick the stone you want. You can make pick the color and size and shape and all that. But once you've dropped it, you cannot control the ripples that result from the impact. And so the dropping of the stone is the work we do on ourselves. And the closest ripples are the effect that the work has on our immediate community, so family and friends, and then out into the village, the city, the town, and out into the country and the world. So the book is structured to begin by looking at things we think we know about who we are and how we work, things we believe, things we take for granted that perhaps we shouldn't do, as some early questions on our show tonight asked about. And then it progresses to work we can do in our lifestyle to make changes based on the realizations that we've come to about ourselves and about who we really are. And then once those lifestyle changes occur, then I talk about community, and then politics, and environment, and ultimately about the spiritual life of service to the greater world and each other. So it does have this sort of ripple effect. And, some I've gotten very generous and kind reviews on Amazon and so on. But, some pushback I get is that it really is asking too much, and it's too utopian. And my answer to that is good, right? If you feel that these are things that are pretty difficult for you to achieve or pretty high-minded in terms of, so for example, one of the things I talk about is that the idea that business should exist for the purpose of profit above all else is a strange idea. Where did we get the idea that a cooperation and collaboration aimed at providing a product or service and providing employment to others and ourselves should be centered and focused on our greed? And so, there are many other challenging ideas in the book like that. And I challenge everybody to not only buy the book and read the book, but more importantly, to actually try to ask yourselves the questions that are in the book and do the work that the book asks you to do, because that's the only way we're going to get anywhere. Otherwise, I'm just some guy hawking a book. It's about much more than that.
So it is an actual book that, like a workbook, if you will. It will exercise someone's mind and allow them a foundation to ask questions.
I very much want to hear from you after you read it, because you have no idea. It really is that.
How did you come up with the title? Like, why did you use the word mad, seeing how that's usually more of a negative?
I love the alliteration, of course, of Mad Monk Manifesto, but and I chose manifesto because it is that kind of a diatribe, and it is exhortative and challenging and rebellious and revolutionary. The subtitle of the book is a prescription for evolution, revolution, and global awakening, and it is that. The word mad, I love that choice because there is some righteous indignation kind of anger in there, like as in, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention, which is a bumper sticker I've seen. But also because mad can mean a little bit crazy. And I think the book does have some of that flavor, deliberately so. It's provocative.
Are you wanting to ruffle people's feathers? Kind of shake them up a little bit?
Absolutely. It is my nature.
I feel that from you. That's I was wondering if that was part of your intention.
Oh, yes, in an impish way, but yes, indeed.
I did flip through some of your book. I haven't had the chance to read it in its entirety, but you do talk about veganism, and you also talk about the environment. Two different topics, obviously, but veganism first. Is this a way of life that you practice, or why do you recommend this to others? So
I've been vegan for a long time, and my immediate circle is vegan. My family, my friends, many people around me are vegan, and there is just such compelling and strong evidence on so many fronts, ranging from the effect that factory farming has on the environment to the moral implications of killing unnecessarily and causing suffering, and to the benefits for our health of the plant-based diet, that it's pretty difficult to not embrace this if you are really paying attention to yourself and what's going on in the world around you. And even if you are not interested in reading the science, and even if you're not interested in the politics around veganism, you can simply ask yourself this question, which I find should be, necessary and sufficient as a reason for veganism for most people. And that is, if you can be as healthy, actually healthier, eating a plant-based diet, and if in doing so you can sidestep, put an end to, and avoid a great deal of suffering in sentient beings around the world, why would you not?
Plus, it is known to be said that being a vegan also cures a lot of disease.
So, as I said, there's like so much science to this that we could do easily, a few shows on that. Right. And there's the issue of pesticides and antibiotics and steroids, hormones in your meat and food. There's heavy metal poisoning in fish. And there's so many things that you are doing to yourself when you eat anything but a plant-based diet, that we could do a whole riff on that. But I prefer just to keep to the previous thing and say, look, if we acknowledge that it's healthier, and if we acknowledge that it's better for the environment and better for our world, and it just comes down to the suffering issue, if you cannot intentionally cause suffering, if you can simply not do that, and you can be healthier too, why wouldn't you?
Exactly. It's a very great question. Why wouldn't you?
And many people don't really have an answer for that. They just say,
we know what we know.
Yeah. Hey, you want to go to a movie? I get that a lot. People just don't want to confront themselves and their choices. And this is something that, somebody wrote in early in the show and asked about. I can't remember what it was. How do we change, I think, our programming, right? So this is a perfect example. You just, when you are awake to these things, you go, why would I do that? I mean, why was I told to do that? And I'll tell you why. Because somebody wants to sell you beef. Because somebody wants to sell you chicken. Because somebody wants to sell you eggs and cheese. Because somebody wants you to believe that drinking the secretion of another animal that it produces for its young is something you need, instead of something that makes you go, ugh, why? Ugh. And then to wait until it rots and eat it some more. Wow. Why?
It's all about that awakening, isn't it?
It really is. That's the common thread. Then you asked me about environment too.
A question in the chat room. I was about to ask you about environment, but there is a question in the chat room on this topic before we move on to environment. If you eat just a plant-based diet, have you ever read about the plant experiences of Cleve Baxter?
I don't know that name. I have not.
Jot it down.
Yeah.
Research it myself.
I actually, yes, now that I think about it, I have. In fact, that's the second time today that somebody mentioned that. So this is not to suggest, A, that there is also not suffering in plants when we kill them, and B, that there are also not plants that are unhealthy to eat. So just because we say a plant-based diet doesn't mean we do it, willy-nilly and without diligence and consideration. But when we talk about, suffering, we're talking about it's impossible really to cause no suffering because we're taking up space and we're stepping on bugs and we're killing bacteria. And, you can take this on to an extent that is not practical. no matter who you are. But what you can choose to do is to try to cause the least suffering you know how to.
Just do the best that you know how.
Yeah.
So moving on to environment, you are one to speak about the rights of the environment, and as well as the animals like the turtles going along with the environment factors. And you bring that up in your book.
So the Abrahamic faiths have given us a strange conceit, and it somehow appears in our scriptures that we have been given this earth by a deity who probably lives between our ears, and we have this earth to do with as we wish, because we are in the primary position here. Occasionally the word steward is mentioned, but mostly it's just ours. It can be our playground and our toilet. This idea is one that I take great exception to, and I have no really strong feelings one way or the other about the Abrahamic faiths or any other religions, and I don't have any opinions about what people choose to believe. But I do think that if we're going to buy those ways of living and those ways of seeing the world, that we have to bring them into the 21st century, and we have to understand that when we have so many billion people on the earth, things that were okay, at least environmentally speaking, thousands of years ago when the population was comparatively minuscule, are no longer. So the idea that we can just trash the planet. Look, this again is a subject that could take hours and hours. Let me just boil it down to this. If I go to your home, I come and visit you, or out west somewhere I think you live, and I go and I visit you, and you say, look, and you open the door and you say, this is my home, come on in, monk. And I walk in, and there are urine and feces everywhere, and the beams are collapsing, and there's mold everywhere, and there's stuff rotting on the kitchen counter, and fungus, and water is filthy, and everything smells bad, and the floor is buckling, and the roof is leaking, and you are happy, blithely living there. Look at my beautiful home. I will see this as a sign of mental illness.
You
right?
would with me, absolutely.
I would see this. I would say to myself, "Oh my God, what's wrong with this woman?" I won't say that to your face, but that is what I will think. So that description is exactly what we are doing to our home. We are not beings like the Star Trek fantasy that are evolving in the direction of being little brains in blue liquid and bubbling vats, having freed ourselves from the constraints of our body and our environment and zooming around the galaxies on cerebral power alone. No, we are organic beings, and this is where we live. This is our home. We count on it to sustain us, and we sustain it. And so if we see what we are doing to the oceans, to the rivers, to blowing up the tops of mountains, to destroying vast, immeasurable tracts of forest and jungle and desert, if we see what we are doing in the context of what I just described of coming into your house or you into mine, and seeing that, we just know something's wrong. And if that is a sign of illness, then as a species, we are at most a cancer on the face of this planet, destroying everything around us, or at least crazy.
It's a very realistic way for you to present that to us. It does put things into perspective, very much so. It's actually kind of left me speechless.
Well,
it is sad to see what is going on, and it is more than sad. It's
more than sad. It's tragic. It's catastrophic. Really,
it absolutely is. It's very heartbreaking, and again, that could be a whole entire show. Unfortunately, 2 hours. on Soul Wanderings goes by so fast, and here we are towards the end of the show. So before we have to wrap it up here in just a couple of minutes, I do want others to be able to grab the book from you, the latest book, Mad Monk Manifesto, as well as any of your other books that they may be called to. And how could they do that?
So all my books are on Amazon and booksellers around the web, and also in brick and mortar stores. If your local bookstore doesn't have it, and I greatly encourage supporting your independent, having them order it for you. You can also go to my website, which is my name, Monk, M-O-N-K, Yun Rou, Y-U-N as in Nancy, R-O-U, monkyunrou.com. And when you get there, you'll find a lovely website designed by my student and friend. And it's a very simple navigation to go either to Tai Chi and my other practices or to my books. One click and you see them all.
Wonderful.
I'm also on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, both as Monk Yun Rou.
Perfect. Got to be on that social media. It's been such a pleasure having you here with us. Thank you so much for spending the last 2 times wandering. I appreciate
really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. You guys have been listening to Soul Wanderings, another journey story in the books. Next week, I don't have a live guest because I regret to inform you that I will not be hosting a live show. This never happens. I love live shows. But we'll be replaying Soul Wandering's 100th episode because I will be traveling to Arizona to visit the largest gem show in the U.S., where I get to be selecting some yummy new inventory for vibes. And I'll be documenting my journey on Instagram and maybe a little bit on Facebook. But I would love for you guys to join me on my trip. So if you go to soulwanderings.com, you can check out all of my social media links there, both professionally and personally, and connect with me while I am out wandering. Thank you, Wanderers, for being here with us and sharing space. I love the support. And Bill, thanks for having my back tonight. I hope you guys have been and continue to learn each week as we share space together, and that you feel comforted and supported in knowing that you are not alone through this human journey. We are all divinely connected and loved. Happy day.